All right, everybody, let's get the show started. Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Lunchtime Discovery Series. It's good to be with you for another edition of the program. It's Wednesday, it's 12 o'clock. That means it's time to have a little fun, learn something new, meet interesting people, and that's what we are going to do. My name is Chris Smith. I'm your host for the program most Wednesdays at noon. Good to be with you. The Lunchtime Discovery Series is brought to you by the Office of Environmental Education and Public Affairs within the Department of Environmental Quality. The great folks over there do the work every week of finding just incredible people who are doing great stuff out there in the realms of science, nature, conservation, and beyond. They bring them into our museum space here, and then we can use our resources here at the Museum of Natural Sciences working together to bring you these cool programs so that we've all got a chance to hear about what's happening in North Carolina and beyond, and the great work that all of us are trying to do to make the world a better place. At least we hope so. We hope so quite a bit. Of course, also, April is Earth Month, and it's Earth Month because April has Earth Day in it, which is next Tuesday. If it's not on your calendars, go ahead and mark it down. April 22nd is Earth Day. Make sure that you celebrate at least Earth Day. Of course, if you're here, you're watching this, that means you're an Earth Month type. So we take the entire month for the lecture series. And for this month, we've been hearing stories of resilience around conservation, places, wild places, and how to be better stewards of the environment so that it serves us and the planet. And today we are going to do a little bit more of that. Let's go ahead and get into it. I'd like for you to meet a couple of folks from Conserving Carolina. First off, everybody say hi to David Lee. He is the Natural Resources Director for Conserving Carolina. Hey, David.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, really glad to be here. Glad that you're all here on what appears to be a beautiful day.
And then a little bit later in the program, we'll be hearing from Leah Waldrum. Leah is the Indigenous Partnership and Restoration Manager for Conserving Carolina. Hi, Leah.
Hi there, everyone. Excited to chat today.
I am excited to hear about the work that you've got going on out in Western North Carolina. A couple of weeks ago, I think it was, we heard about some restoration work going on in areas like Marshall, North Carolina, in the wake of Helene. And so I'm thrilled that we can kind of continue these conversations. That storm, right, was such like a bookmark in people's minds of, I think, or at least I hope these days, the value, the importance of planning and resilience and thinking about conservation, especially on topics like climate change as we move forward. And so I'm excited for your presentation to learn about all the work that you've got going on. And David, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you.
Great. I really appreciate the introduction, Chris. And as I said, we're really excited to have this opportunity to talk with you all today. Before I get into sort of the nuts and bolts of our presentation here, I did want to talk briefly about the organization that Leah and I work for, Conserving Carolina. We are a regional land trust based primarily in the western part of the state. We primarily focus on 3 counties, Henderson, Transylvania, and Polk, but we also do our work in several of the surrounding counties over here in the west. Our mission is to protect, restore, and inspire appreciation for the natural world, and we do that in a number of ways, as you can see here on the screen. But our main function is still a land trust, and so we do a lot of land protection work. To date, we have protected over 49,000 acres of land in our service area. We're really excited and hopeful to get to that 50,000 acre mark this year. Some places you may know if you visited our part of the state, we helped protect places like Chimney Rock State Park. We were instrumental in helping acquire the initial land that was privately owned and then transferred to the state. We've also worked on DuPont State Recreational Forest and several other state lands, adding lands to Pisgah National Forest as well. So in addition to land protection, we also do a lot of trail work, and you may know us for some of that. We are the sponsor of the Hickory Nut Gorge State Trail, which is a effort to create over 100 miles of trail in the Lake Lure area We currently have put 38 miles of trail on the ground, and we not only created that trail, but we manage and maintain it. So if you're in our neck of the woods, love for you to look us up and get out on some of those wonderful natural surface trails. More recently, we've been doing some greenway work as well. We're working on a 19-mile rail trail conversion between Brevard and Hendersonville, and we're also partnering with some folks in, excuse me, in South Carolina and working on a larger 31-mile trail between Inman, South Carolina, and Hendersonville. So, with that said, we also have a pretty robust restoration program, which is what we're here to talk to you today about. This map on the screen shows some of our more recent restoration work. The blue line, the larger blue line in the middle, is the French Broad River, and it's flowing from Rosman in that bottom left corner north towards and through Asheville. Those orange blobs are some of our more recent restoration projects, and we'll talk a little bit about most of these today. We have a relatively short history doing these restoration projects. Over the past 14 years, we've completed 12 projects. We've started our larger floodplain restoration work in 2020. And exciting to me and exciting to many folks is that we have 13 projects planned over the next 5 years, and essentially plan to double the work that we've done over the last 14 years. So a lot of momentum. There's lots of reasons for that momentum. These are really good projects that have a lot of benefit to the community, which we'll go over later today. And I think our momentum is going to be propelled even more after the devastation that we witnessed from Hurricane Helene. It's kind of revitalized the importance of working correctly in our floodplain habitats here in Western North Carolina and other places. So generally, why do we restore, or why did Conserving Carolina decide to do this work? It's pretty apparent that, if you look at the French Broad River Valley in our service area, that human development has degraded the natural ecological systems that were in place. We started to see, degraded habitat. We started to see decreased water quality. We obviously recently have seen the impacts of flooding, although we were witnessing some of those impacts from flooding prior to Helene. Helene was just a once in a lifetime, hopefully, event that really highlighted those effects. So we were just noticing all of the impacts from this development in agriculture in our area, and decided that it was worth our time and effort to sort of reverse those issues. And we focus on several things when we're doing these restoration projects, but primarily we're trying to restore that natural ecological function that had been degraded or lost from human settlement. We want to improve water quality, control erosion. We really want to improve diversity of terrestrial and aquatic habitats, mainly to benefit at-risk and threatened and endangered species. We are always thinking about climate resiliency and mitigation in our work. And, because we are a public land trust serving our community, we're also very much so thinking about the recreational, educational, and cultural benefits to these projects, as well as the economic benefits. So we're going to go over pretty much all those benefits by showing you a couple examples of some projects that we've done. This here on the screen in red is what we call our Mouth of Mud Creek project. We implemented this restoration project in 2020, and this was our first large-scale project. It sits just south of the Asheville Airport, if you're familiar, on the French Broad River. And what's kind of unique about the site is it sits at the confluence of the French Broad River and Mud Creek, which is another prominent waterway that runs through the city of Hendersonville. This is what the site looked like back in 2013. It was once a dairy farm long ago that was largely subdivided and developed. As you can see there to the north, there's a pretty dense subdivision just to the north of the tract. The remaining floodplain portions of the property continued to be in agriculture, row crops and tomatoes for some time. But over the years, the agricultural use declined because of frequent flooding and upkeep required to maintain the fields. So throughout its agricultural history, lots of things were done to this property to alter it. You can kind of see these lines of trees on the property. These are drainage ditches. They were installed essentially to drain surface water and subsurface water off of the property into the French Broad. There's also, you can't really see it here, a berm that was pushed up, an artificial berm along the river, and that was to keep water out when the river rose. The property is obviously kept in agriculture, so most of the native vegetation is cut. The ground is cultivated. So a lot of impact here. And this is not, a natural system. You wouldn't expect this in a floodplain. And so our thought here was to kind of reverse those impacts and create a more natural system. And we'll go over these features in more detail, but in order to do that, we created what we call backwater sloughs. These are wet habitats directly connected to the river. We created a whole bunch of wetlands and enhanced wetlands, floodplain pools. We created another wetland here that was focused primarily on mitigating stormwater. Not officially, but it does treat stormwater from this subdivision. And we also created pollinator habitats. Really pretty large scale project. And if I didn't mention, this is about 100-acre property, so that gives you some scale. These are large features. This was 10 years later from that photo, 3 years after we completed the restoration, and you can see things look quite different. Those drainage ditches are not really visible anymore, and they're not functioning to drain the property. And we've got these, the whole site's sort of being revegetated. And that's our ultimate goal here, is to create a montane alluvial floodplain forest throughout the majority of the property, which is a somewhat rare and declining natural community in North Carolina. So let's talk a little bit about each of these features. I mentioned those backwater sloughs, and you can see in this photo here that these are open water areas directly connected to the river, and these largely would have been in existence in these floodplains along the French Broad River, but were filled in and essentially removed from the landscape in order to make room for agriculture and development. And these features have gotten us a lot of attention. I think we're really the only folks, at least in the western part of the state, doing this on this scale. And we got involved with the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission pretty early, and the initial idea of these features was to support a game fish called the muskie. It's thought that this fish can no longer reproduce in the river because these features don't really exist anymore. And the commission has been stocking this fish for years, since the 70s, to support the native population and to support fishing as well. So we've created some of these. And the way it was explained to me, and I really like this explanation on why they're kind of so important. Imagine trying to live in the river. This is the main stem of the French Broad River here. If you had to live in the river, which is constantly moving, it's kind of like being on a treadmill at all times. It never stops moving. And if you're trying to, lay your eggs, raise your fry, let the fry grow in order to be able to survive on that treadmill, it's almost impossible to do in the river. You need these backwater areas as refuge for that spawning process. And so that was the idea. We've learned since then that these are also really valuable for a whole bunch of other species, both aquatic and terrestrial. This lower picture here is another one we created on a project we'll look at in a little bit. So in addition to creating those backwater areas, really the underlying ecological function that we're trying to restore to these floodplains is the hydrology. They are floodplains because of the regular flooding that occurs from the river. And I mentioned that farmers and others would usually put big berms along the river to keep that flooding out. So we made a conscious effort to break as many of those berms as possible in strategic locations, so that when we get some rain or when the French Broad River rises, it more easily can spill over onto the land. And that's really important because it dictates the plants and animals that exist in the floodplain, but it also allows, sediment and other pollutants to filter out on the floodplain. And it also keeps depressional areas and other wetland areas more hydrologically connected, which has a number of benefits as well. In all the areas that we broke the berm, we also stabilized the stream bank, which is important as well. Stream banks are very steep in the French Broad River. There's a lot of erosion that occurs from them. So where we could, we made improvements to the stream bank as well. Another big component of all these projects is floodplain wetlands. Obviously, restoring that natural hydrology and allowing the river to flood more frequently will inherently create and enhance these floodplains, these wetlands. But we also took some extra steps. We often will plug ditches to expand wetland habitat. We also will dig, depressional areas to create new wetland habitat. And so these are extremely important for water quality, for climate resiliency, and also for a number of endemic plant and animal species here in North Carolina. So we focus a lot on creating these wetlands. We also recognize that our pollinators are really important and in decline as well. So with most of our projects, we take the spill or the fill from all of the digging that we do, and we create pollinator areas that we manage and maintain in early succession, primarily to support species like the monarch butterfly. I think we're up to 25 or 30 acres of this important habitat. We're also always looking to promote that recreational and educational access. All of our sites where we can, we allow and plan for the public with either public or sort of limited access hiking trails. We also partner with other organizations to provide sort of riverside camping sites on these properties in order to, facilitate that connection with the land. So Hurricane Helene, we were doing these projects before, obviously, and a component of them involved floodplain resiliency, flood mitigation, but after September of last year, we really extra realized the importance of these floodplain properties. And it wasn't just us that could see that, it was the entire community. We could all see that these areas needed to flood. They wanted to flood, and that's their function. And we were just really excited to see that all these projects that we had done on the floodplains, they fared amazingly. They not only stored water during this event, they weren't degraded. They, if anything, they took sand. They took sediment out of the system, and so it really reassured that the work we had been doing is really important, and it was done well. Our goal was always to create a system that functioned on its own. That didn't require a lot of maintenance and management from us. We wanted it to be natural, and so this photo just shows that same site before and after, and you can barely tell the difference other than a slight gray tinge, which is that sediment deposition. And so unfortunately, we didn't have any aerial photos of during the peak flows of the storm, but this whole property would have been underwater by 17 feet. And water essentially got up to the back yards of those homes there. So a lot of those residents got to see that firsthand, and we're also very grateful for the work that we're doing. An estimated 550 million gallons of water just on that 100 acres alone. Here's just some more before and after photos that you really can't tell the difference, despite there being 17 feet of water rushing through this floodplain. Some more before and after. All right, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about another project. This is what we call the Pleasant Grove site. And it sits in an area that we are called Etowah, kind of between Brevard and Hendersonville, again, on the French Broad River. And this one's got a really interesting history. In the 20s, it was a pretty large and well-known dairy farm. And so that had its impacts to the property. But unfortunately, in the early to mid 2000s, it was acquired by a developer, and an 8-hole Arnold Palmer golf course was created. And you can see these ponds were dug, and there was plans for a large, residential community to be associated with this, and with additional land adjacent to this property. Some folks may remember this. What it used to be called the Seven Falls development, and I believe the developers still in jail for a bunch of violations and things that he did out here. But to make a long story short, we were able to acquire this property in 2017 and kind of take it from this very impacted state to a more natural, floodplain property that similar to what we did over at the mouth of Mud Creek. So these features are all very similar. We developed a good model and we knew it worked, so we did our best to repeat it. We created a really large backwater slough here with one of the ponds that was already dug. We plugged ditches to create a large wetland area. This is about 25 acres. We created a pollinator area habitat, floodplain pools. And then this project, we also were able to restore a creek called Little Willow Creek, which was a really awesome addition. And so this is what you can see afterwards in 2023, what it looks like. And here's some of those features. This is that backwater slough. So we're and what I didn't say earlier, and what makes these features so important, is that the connection here, this slough, is the same elevation as the bottom of the river, and that's important because it allows the aquatic species to utilize it at the right time of year, and shouldn't completely dry up unless the river dries up. Another shot of the property. This is a quick video here of Little Willow Creek, which we restored, I think, over 5,000 linear feet. And this was an incised creek. And, we've been kind of talking about the importance of reconnecting the French Broad River, this large river, to the floodplain. But those same principles apply here. This river was straight and it was really deep. So we brought that river channel up and re-meandered and restabilized it. And so now when we get large rain events and this river starts to flood, it can access its floodplain, and all that water can spread out before it enters the French Broad River and makes its way downstream. So lots of benefits to doing stream restoration work and floodplain work for the community and for the plants and animals that's associated with these habitats. In all of the bends, we did a bunch of tow wood to slow down the water and stabilize it. In the straits, we rose that bed even more to create that riffle effect. Those riffles and pools are really important. They create a lot of important habitat, in-stream habitat for macroinvertebrates and fish and other aquatic species. So much better than a straight ditched stream. Just a wonderful addition to the project. This was Pleasant Grove before and after Helene, and as you can see, same sort of scenario. We've got that gray tinge from the sediment that fell out. This also had 17 feet of water across the majority of the site, and stored over 270 million gallons of water. Some more before and after photos. We did have some minor erosion here at the Pleasant Grove site that our contractors were able to repair. And this was completed, this project was completed in 2022. So it had already been 2 years. This last one I'm going to talk to you about is our most recent project, and this is Kings Bridge. This is actually state-owned by the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. We acquired the property first, and then we transferred it to the state, and then we worked with them to raise funds to restore it, similar to these other two projects. It sits on the French Broad River as well, as you can see here. And similarly, it had some of the same issues as the other sites. It was in sod production for a long time, and it had these drainage ditches to facilitate the drainage of surface and subsurface water. And you'll be able to recognize all these features by now. We created backwater sloughs, expanded riparian buffer habitat, floodplain forest. This blue is wetlands that we created and enhanced from plugging those ditches. This was during construction in the summer of last year, and we actually completed this construction project the week before Helene hit. And so we were most worried about this one because vegetation was not established yet. But similarly to the other sites, it fared so well. We saw, again, deposition. We didn't see really any erosion on the site. We did have to replant all of our permanent and temporary seed washed away. But that's the least of our worries. It was easy to reseed, and we are in the process actually right now of completing revegetation with permanent vegetation, bare roots and live stakes. And so, these photos show it best. I mean, that top left is September, and then October after the storm, you could really see that deposition. There was just so much sand, sediment, and silt that fell out during the rain event. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Leah here to talk to you more about another really important component of all these restoration projects, which is our partnership with the Eastern Band of Cherokee. Leah, take it away.
Sweet. So yeah, this is just another addition to these projects. They're very multifaceted, as you've been hearing. So what we're looking at here is a map of historic Cherokee land. Henderson County, where most of these restoration projects are located, is just south of Buncombe County, has that blue line cutting right through it. Henderson County was ceded by the Cherokee in 1798, so not too long ago. And not only do we want to work to restore functioning ecosystems and habitat, but we want to approach restoration in a new way with a lens of reparation and respect for the original inhabitants of the land that we're trying to protect. So after building relationships in the Cherokee community, we met with a variety of community members to ask how we could best support them in our work. And one of the things that was mentioned across the community was a lack of access to traditional artisan materials. These materials are necessary for keeping traditional knowledge alive, including sustainable harvest methods and processing of raw material. So not only are we working to increase access to mature species on our preserves, but we've also been incorporating the planting of culturally significant species on our restoration sites as well. So on this slide, we see river cane in the far left, which is a native bamboo species, once widespread across the southeast that has been in steep decline since colonization. River cane is commonly used as a weaving material, but is used in other crafts as well. That middle image there is yellow root, which is very aptly named for that bright yellow root. It's used as a dye material, often for weaving as well. And then on the right there, we see a material that is referred to as blue clay. It has like a deep, dark gray coloration to it, and it can kind of have a blue hue as well. And that's used by the Cherokee for ceramics. So our first harvest came about as a result of our restoration work at Pleasant Grove. Contractors came across some of that blue clay in the construction of the slough as they were digging things out. We partnered with Cherokee artisans to go harvest that clay, which was then distributed among community members and then used in processing classes to engage new generations of Cherokee artisans. You can go to the next one. Since that first harvest, we've planted over 3,000 river cane, 700 white oak, and 1,000 yellow root on various restoration sites, and we've facilitated several harvests in partnership with our Cherokee partners, and we're super excited to expand on this partnership moving forward. This image is from Pleasant Grove. We're planting a bunch of river cane and yellow root on site to be made available once it's mature for harvest. This is my friend Jeremy, who's planting some yellow root. You can see that bright yellow root poking out of the root ball, and river cane as well. It's also at Pleasant Grove. And then this is some white oak planting. We did plant white oak at some restoration sites, but we've also planted in mature forests so that it can kind of mimic where folks would traditionally be harvesting and hopefully slow the growth of the white oak so it's better quality for artisan material. Yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you all for listening here. I'm gonna stop sharing so you guys can see us.
Fantastic stuff. David, Leah, thank you.
Thank
Our
you.
pleasure.
Really interesting work that you've got going on. The scale of the projects is really impressive. Like hundreds of acres at a time that you're rolling in and completely redesigning in the way that nature designed it in the first place. That's it feels like a very big task, even to do a 100-acre site.
It
Can you
is.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and we're a smaller nonprofit land trust, certainly not generally equipped to handle these really large projects. And I mentioned during the presentation that in 2020 we implemented the first of these really large projects. Previous to that, we'd been working in smaller habitats. We're talking 5 to maybe 10-acre restorations at the most. But that 2020 project was really a turning point, working on 100 acres, impacting about 50 acres. And we really couldn't do that without our partnerships with our state and federal folks. We acquired that property, that Mouth of Mud Creek property, in 2015, I believe. And we formed a task force with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and a couple of other nonprofits and community partners. And that really gave us the capacity and ability to work on these large projects. We were able to lean on those partners to help us develop our plans and figure out like what and how we could do this. Because, in addition to just figuring out what and how, we had to figure out how to fundraise, and that was the other big piece. And so that technical advisory team, and they continue to be a huge asset to us with all of our future projects, were instrumental in allowing us to do these large scale projects. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add, Leah, but I can't stress enough the importance of those partnerships.
Yeah, it's necessary.
There are some questions coming in for you that's in the chat there on YouTube. I will remind all of our viewers, and we got plenty of folks watching today. I'll remind everybody, if you've got thoughts or questions, experiences, you can share those into the chat on YouTube. Type them up, submit them. As they show up there for me, I'll drop them into the program so that you all can learn more about what you want to know more about from our two experts today. First question that came in for you, this viewer wanted to know if you could purchase the farm field to the south and revegetate that. I think on the first, I think that one came through when you were discussing the first property you worked on.
Yeah, that's a good question. We are always actively, looking at our neighbors and other opportunities to do not just restoration, but conservation work. We have approached that landowner. And in fact, they are the landowner that we acquired the land in the third project from, Kings Bridge. They're a large sod owner. And we also, not shown in this presentation, we also have conservation easements on some of their land along the French Broad River. And so let me also take a step back. We are trying our best not to do this just here's a spot. We have worked and developed sort of restoration plans for the French Broad along in Transylvania and Henderson County, and that helps guide like where we focus these restoration efforts on. Because we also have a very important agricultural community in our region, and that's important for a number of reasons. And so we're striving to strike a good balance where we're supporting that agricultural work while also in the right places doing this restoration work. And so this is a long answer to your question. We are in active talks with that across the stream neighbor. And although it's unlikely that we will do a large-scale floodplain restoration project on that land, what we likely, the best outcome is to expand that riparian buffer and protect that riparian buffer and work with the landowner in that way. So there's many tools that we can use to do our work. We don't have to do extensive floodplain restoration work along the entire French Broad River corridor. But our goal is to do that type of work where it makes the most sense, and then implement these other tools in other areas, whether it's conservation easements, expanding riparian buffers, or doing other BMPs, best management practices. But that was a really good question. Thank you.
And that was a fantastic answer. That was great.
Thanks.
Like, because like a question that came up for me when you were talking about that project too was the presence of the subdivision, the housing development that's right there, that your project butts right up to. And I could imagine being a homeowner, for example, close to the river or close to your project, and looking at that berm coming down and thinking, oh no, what's gonna happen when the floodwaters rise and it's headed towards my backyard, even though the projects that you're doing actually support, the water spreading out over a greater area, not just inundating inundating in the right way, I guess is the way to say it.
Yeah, that's a good. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Well,
interrupt.
and you mentioned working with, agriculture in the area too, because the farmers also don't need their fields flooding in these events, and that these natural restored spaces can alleviate a lot of that pressure.
Yes, exactly. And so I think the ultimate goal here is to give the water a place to go in the right places. And by allowing water to flow in that example, that Mouth of Mud Creek example, by allowing it to inundate and fully access its floodplain in that location, we are, and I don't want to oversell the project, we are marginally improving flooding downstream, right? When we do our projects, all the ones we've done to date, we get what's essentially called a no rise. We are not affecting in a substantial way where that water is expected to flood to. But we are allowing the river and the floodwater to activate its floodplain either more frequently or earlier than it would have, which does help in those cases. You mentioned the neighbors, and we get all kinds of questions, concerns, and comments from neighbors, and we see it as a really good educational opportunity, right? Similar to what we just discussed, like people think that our work is going to directly cause flooding impacts on their property when it's really the opposite. So we have the opportunity to explain that. We also get a lot of questions and concerns about mosquitoes and, oh, where are all the snakes going to go now that it floods more? They're all going to come into my backyard. And so we get the opportunity to further educate folks and explain that this natural ecological system is actually going to keep the mosquitoes and snakes in balance and actually give them a place to go rather than your backyard.
I could hear complaints about mosquitoes while you were presenting.
Yes, I'm sure.
I've been in this world long enough and worked with the public for many years here at the museum, and I also don't like mosquitoes, but in a natural system, that you're not actually worrying about them all that much. But of course, the fears are founded, right? The people don't want their quality of life impacted in those negative ways, and projects like this are new, right? I feel like stream restoration, riparian buffers, even though we've had regulations, for example, for going on 50 years now, let's say since the 1970s or beyond, these sorts of really conservation-minded, environmentally sustainable projects, and maybe you can enlighten me, seem relatively new on the landscape for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think in thinking about the whole time scale that we've been doing this kind of work in this country, it is pretty new. I think what's happening more often is that development is increasing, and so yeah, people being next to or adjacent to these projects is just more it's more frequent. Where before, a lot of times when stream restoration and floodplain and wetland restoration was occurring, it was just sort of out of sight, out of mind. But now it's just by nature, it's right in people's backyards. And I didn't talk too much about the other public benefits of some of these projects, including allowing access and having recreation. Often that increases property values and improves quality of life. And so there's that side of it too. I think people are recognizing that even if they still believe that there's some downsides, if say they are unconvinced about declining mosquito populations, they can often overlook that by being able to walk out their backyard and go on a hike in a newly restored preserve is what we call them. And we're actually getting a lot of interest from developers and local governments in making sure that as development continues in our area, that these things are also thought of, before the plans are finalized to build a subdivision. So, yeah, lots of positive things that are coming out of these projects.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Which also brings to mind, Leah, the partnerships and the folks that you've been working with to try to, I was thinking about the question I just asked, like these are new projects on the landscape. But if we take a much broader view, these are not new projects on the landscape. These landscapes used to be managed in much, well, I guess healthier ways, managed in ways that were much friendlier to the ways that nature built things, it seems, and not 900 home developments carved up into tiny parcels, berms, and for agriculture and floodplains, I suppose. So can you talk a little bit about the way your partners see these restorations?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of excitement from the folks that I've had conversation with and a lot of interest. And there's also, when I've had folks out on the land, specifically with harvesting clay, there's kind of like a deep recognition and familiarity with the land, seeing it as a place where they would have oftentimes settled along the river, and also used to have like deep relationship with clay caches that were in the land, right? Like they used to know where they would go to harvest clay, and a lot of these um, spots have been forgotten, lost, exploited. And so yeah, there's like this kind of beautiful familiarity, I guess. Yeah, just repeating what I've said, but just a deep familiarity with place when I bring them out to these spots, and appreciation and kind of this like moment of remembering. Yeah, it's been lovely to have them out there, and then to have them, especially with river cane, which we've planted at all of these restoration sites thus far and managed specifically at our Mud Creek site. It's a plant that has a deep storied history in the Cherokee space, and they're just really deeply grateful to have increased awareness and intentionality around planting out there. There's a strong desire to see that plant flourish again.
So in the preserves that you take on and manage, and I suppose in your conservation easements, maybe even the land trust agreements, how do you work out the, for example, you mentioned the harvesting agreements.
Right.
How do those things end up playing out in those agreements?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we're kind of figuring it out as we go. Because I think that is a rather new a new aspect of what we're doing, and we're having a lot of conversations within the land trust community about it right now. Part of it kind of goes back to what you were mentioning before about management. There's like this idea with Western conservation that like that conservation means like a hands-off approach, and it means that you just don't touch it. You kind of like preserve the land in its natural state, but that's not really how we when colonizers came over and saw like all the lovely open forests and land, that it was actually a highly managed environment that they were seeing and admiring. Um, and so a lot of these conservation easements kind of restrict harvesting because it's seen as like an interference, and kind of at odds with conservation. But what we're trying to um, incorporate more and like have more conversation about is that this is actually oftentimes management is allowed in conservation easements, but harvesting is not. And so we're trying to have conversations that help people understand that um, harvesting isn't going and like clear cutting a forest. Oftentimes harvesting is like um, can be seen as like canopy opening, which is really good for our forests and helps reduce mesofication, which we see a lot in this area. When we go out and harvest, it's oftentimes it's like a sustainable harvest. You're going and like picking 1 or 2 trees out of the forest. You're not going and like cutting a bunch of trees down. So I think again, it just goes back to like education and understanding and kind of trying to expand our awareness and our periphery to like other ways of being and being in relationship with land. So
Excellent stuff. Thank you. Okay, more questions for you both from the chat. NC Wetlands wants to know if there are any concerns about toxins in the deposited sediments that we saw on your sites.
No, we're not too concerned about that. We in Henderson and Transylvania counties, we're in the upper French Broad, and I guess thankfully there's much less land and contaminated land that Helene impacted above us. But we have partnered with an organization called Mountain True, which does more of the sort of ecological monitoring and advocacy in our region, and they have tested several of our sites, and nothing abnormal has come from that. They've also tested and shown that the wetlands on our site, at least specifically the ones at that Mud Creek site, have been effectively controlling fecal coliform bacteria, which we suspect is coming from the dog poop up in that community. But sorry, I'm digressing there. The short answer is no, we're not seeing any contaminants in that deposition at this time. I mean, not to say that it's not there somewhere, but we haven't seen any.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
Yes.
Let's see. Stephanie says, in the first project, was there a monitoring component for muskie to see if they're spawning?
Yeah, really good question. And yes, that was a huge part of our project and direct result of our wonderful partnership with the Wildlife Resources Commission. Their fisheries department division has done a wonderful job monitoring the effects of that. At each of these sloughs, there is a monitoring station that's solar powered with an antenna array that goes underneath the slough. And all of the fish that the commission stocks in the river have a personal identification tag in them, similar to what your dog or cat would get. And then the commission also fishes the river, and they find any untagged fish, they tag them as well. And so with these sloughs, every time one of those muskie swim into the slough and cross that antenna, a whole bunch of personal information is recorded, everything from the age and sex of the fish, where it was released. They have all this wonderful data, and we are not the scientists, we're not the experts. We rely on them, and I would encourage you to reach out to the commission. They've done several talks, and they have lots of data on the results of these features, and we continue to do them because that data supports that they are using them. I think within 2 weeks of the last one of Kings Bridge, that slough being created, there were muskie using that feature. We've also learned things like fish have traveled over 30 miles to access these sloughs. We also believe that during Helene, during all this flooding, these sloughs were refuge for fish like muskie to take safe harbor when everything around them was going crazy. And so I can't speak too much more on that other than that the commission's doing a great job documenting that information, and they've given several presentations. I will also just add, because it's really interesting, the non-game division has also tagged some species of concern as well. So non-game species, and they're using these antenna arrays to better understand how those species are using the slough and in the river. So yes, there's an active monitoring program, and there's some good results from that.
Exciting. Barcoding the muskie and tracking them all up and down the French Broad. That's fun.
Hmm.
I like that. Sounds exciting. Okay. David wants to know if you want to expand beyond your 3-county area.
Well, yeah, and maybe I was a little bit restrictive. Our primary counties are those 3, but we do work in, I'd say, 7 or 8 surrounding counties, and we also work a little bit in the upstate of South Carolina. So
okay,
I'd say we probably aren't going to expand much more than that. Don't hold me to that, but you know, we as a land trust work with a bunch of partner land trusts all over the state and in South Carolina and Georgia, and we all generally have our service areas and our regions. To our north, we have Southern Appalachians Highlands Conservancy. To our west, we have Highland Cachers Land Trust. To our northeast, we have Foothills Conservancy. To our south, we have Upstate Forever. And so we all work together. There's a capacity thing too. Like we really don't want to be monitoring or working on something, 2 or 3 hours away when there's another land trust that's more than capable of doing that. So our focus is, Henderson, Transylvania, and Polk, and the immediate surrounding counties.
Are there any recommended resources to use when developing planting plans for these restoration sites, and maybe also resources for culturally significant native plants as well?
Yeah, these are really good questions. So I'd say the biggest thing that we learned with planting on these restoration projects is to use a local contractor. You don't necessarily have to use a local contractor to do the construction, but for the planting portion of those plans, using a local contractor is just going to make a big difference. They are here in the region. They're very familiar with the local ecotypes and how to source them. And in most cases, the contractors we use source them and grow them at nurseries here in our service area. So you can't get any more local than that. And then they also have that local knowledge and expertise. They're also going to stick around too. They're not really going anywhere. So when we have warranty work or we see that something didn't grow as it should, they're right there to help us fix it. So I think in developing those planting plans, working with both your engineer and your local plant expert is the way to go. And in some cases, that local plant expert, as Leah might mention, is and should be, in our case, an Eastern Band of Cherokee member, who can help with that. The other thing that I'll mention with plants in the same category is on that first project in 2020, we created a very extensive, detailed planting plan. We spent a lot of money on plants, and we learned to scale that back. We are restoring native hydrology on these sites, and I think as long as I'll just maybe say it more simply. The native species come back, and it's really exciting to see. We realized we didn't have to spend as much money and time making sure that we have all these native plants because the right ones came back, and they have on every site. So we focus more strategically now on the heavily impacted areas, the graded areas, and of course, as always, stabilizing immediately after those sites were disturbed. And then we focus more of our money on controlling non-native invasive plants so that those natural communities aren't impacted by that after our restoration. But maybe let me turn it over to you, Leah, to add more with the Cherokee plantings if you want.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is just that like our the planting list that we've now started incorporating into these restoration sites has, in regards to culturally significant species, what folks would say out in Cherokee is that like every single native plant here is significant to them. I have kind of come come up with a list through conversation with folks out there about what plants maybe that they would like that they have decreased access of. So that's kind of like how we came up with like river cane and white oak and things like that. But we do have just like a longer list of species that are of interest in general. And we pass that off to our planting partners and our contractors, and we say like whatever makes sense on this site, here's a list of interest. So that's kind of how we've handled that aspect.
Yeah, you reminded me of something too. I'll just add. I think earlier when we were doing this work, before that 2020 project, we had maybe four plants, and that was, that's what you do. We because of our partnership with the Cherokee and because of that effort to work with local nurseries and local plant contractors, I feel like we have been successful in adding more diversity and interest in the plant species. And I think that's valuable to the site. And in my mind, more important than just getting it revegetated. Having the right plants there and some of that diversity is important too. So
excellent stuff. Kenneth in the chat wants to know if you have any dealings with lumber or paper and pulp companies while restoring the land, and is hoping that they're positive.
No, I don't have any examples. In our service area here, and on the restoration projects we have typically implemented, we're really dealing with agricultural production, and by agriculture I just mean row crops, corn, tomatoes, dairy farms. I can't speak more to that. We haven't had any interactions with any timbering operations or paper companies with our projects. Sorry.
Sorry, getting those stories for you today, I guess. But our time here is about wrapped up. So David, Leah, if folks are interested in learning more about what Conserving Carolina is getting up to, how do they follow along? How do they stay connected to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. The best way is having this bookmarked website on your browser, conservingcarolina.org. We have all of our news and events and volunteer work days and articles all on there. And we do the whole social media thing. So, and you can tell I'm not I'm not a social media person, but I think it's Facebook, Instagram. I don't know. Leah, you should talk. All those wonderful social platforms. We do a pretty good job sharing all the stories and all the wonderful things we're working on. So I would encourage you to reach us there. Both Leah and I are also listed on the website, and if you have additional questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, whether you're in our service area or not. We're happy to help connect you with the answers to your questions, or with the local land trust in your area, or local contractors in your area if we know them. So we're happy to discuss further as well. So thanks.
Excellent stuff. Thank you both. This was fantastic. I'm glad we had a lot of time today for the Q&A too. Y'all have had some great experiences, great insights, and it was fascinating to learn about the work that you're doing and the way that you're going about it. Being thoughtful, using science, using history, all to make informed decisions to better the landscape. So thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for having us. Have a good day.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of the Lunchtime Discovery Series. We will be back here again next Wednesday for another program. Don't miss out. Head to eenorthcarolina.org. That's the website for the Office of Environmental Education. There you can see upcoming programs and events like this one, as well as sign up for the email newsletter for this lecture series. That way you get the YouTube link in your inbox Wednesday morning. It's right there at the top. It's an easy click to come and join us. So I hope we'll see you again here real soon. You can also head to the museum's website, naturalsciences.org, and you can see upcoming programs and events. This one is included on our calendar as well. So don't miss out. I hope that I'll see everybody here again next week. It'll be the day after Earth Day, so everybody should be really hype for some science and conservation learning just the day after Earth Day. Which I should say, we've got a fun program happening on Earth Day here at the Museum of Natural Sciences. We've partnered with PBS North Carolina to host their State of Change screening and panel discussion. There's going to be a reception beforehand, and then we're going to screen clips from the State of Change documentary series for this year, and then have a great discussion with some experts all about projects happening here in North Carolina to address climate change in lots of great ways. So head to the museum's website, look for State of Change. You can get registered up for free to come and join us on Earth Day for a fantastic program. Everybody, take care, stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll see you again soon. Bye.